So my name is Lauren Braden, and I am the Director of Brand Experience for Behavioral Essentials, the official partner of Blindspotting. And in today's session, we're going to be taking a focused look at Blindspotting, which is a targeted performance model that helps leaders understand what may be holding them back. And most importantly for today, helps HR leaders see what may be holding their people back. So we're joined by Marty Dubin, who is a clinical psychologist, executive coach, and author of Harvard Business Review book, Blindspotting. And he's going to introduce us to some core concepts of his self-awareness model and explain why it's such a powerful tool specifically for smarter onboarding, role alignment, culture, and performance. And we'll also hear from Kassey Kampman, EVP of People at SSA Group, who will give us the C-suite perspective. So why self-awareness is such an essential organizational investment and the insights she has gained through her own blind spotting experience and how this work has strengthened collaboration and effectiveness across her executive team. But before we jump into that, I want to just give everyone a quick overview of who Behavioral Essentials is and why we're here. So let's start that. So at Behavioral Essentials, we really use the power of awareness and specifically awareness of behaviors to help people hire better and grow leaders and teams. So using our E3 Behavioral Insights platform and Blindspotting, we help leaders and teams better understand themselves and others so they can be happier, work better together, make the right hires, which is why you all are here, and ultimately grow your business. And within our product suite at Behavioral Essentials, we have a brand new product line in partnership with our guest, Marty Dubin, and that is called Blindspotting. And it's a 3-step model that's really designed for fast, focused insight. So it starts with the Blindspotting book, which was published by Harvard Business Review Press recently, that introduces 6 blind spot areas that limit leadership, stall growth, and really cloud a leader's decision making. Then we created a blind spotting assessment, which builds on these insights, helping people uncover which blind spots are getting in their way. And then from there, we have our performance coaching programs that give you tools and guidance to turn that awareness into a clear action plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jill to introduce our guests a bit more and really dive into how this framework can empower HR leaders. Jill?
Thank you, Lauren. Hello, everyone. I'm Jill Macauley. I'm the COO of Behavioral Essentials, and I'm very excited to facilitate a discussion today. We want it to be a discussion, in particular between Kassey and Marty, talking about blind spotting, both kind of all-inclusive, talking first and foremost about blind spotting and the power of awareness as Kassey reflects on her own journey as an individual, as a kind of team member of an executive team looking at blind spotting at that executive level. And then we're going to dive into really blind spotting on the HR level, as Lauren said, looking at everything from onboarding to role alignment and culture. And we'll expand that and end our conversation today with talking about blind spotting organizationally and looking at the prioritization of roles and engage in a conversation around that. So we welcome each of you to add questions, thoughts in the chat. Lauren will monitor those and we'll integrate those into our conversation accordingly, as well as Kassey and Marty. I hope you ask each other questions and dive into an active discussion between the 3 of us today. So with that, we are excited to bring forward the framework of blind spotting. And in that, the book, Marty articulates a self-awareness framework that reveals how often our greatest strengths can often become hidden blind spots that hold us back. With that, Marty, why don't you just give us an overview of the blind spotting self-awareness framework and talk about why it's just relevant in business in general.
Sure. Thanks, Jill, and thanks, Lauren, for setting this up. So blind spots are when we're unaware of when we're being ineffective leaders. This isn't about strengths and weaknesses. This is about just kind of how our brain works and our personality works and just kind of flaws in the system. But there are flaws in the system. We're talking when we should be listening, or we're driving our team towards some particular kind of objective, and we're not paying attention to the fact that our team isn't communicating well with each other or with another function in the company. So typically successful leaders who have been promoted and risen in the system, are successful 80, 90% of the time. But blind spots are the time when we don't realize that the situation is calling for us to have a different response than our default response. And so all this boils down to what you're seeing on the screen. It boils down to self-awareness. Do we know what our common blind spots are when our default personality isn't appropriate for the particular situation, and when we should be able to be self-aware and pivot to a different response?
Thank you, Marty. With that, actually, Kassey, would love just to hear from your perspective. Why is investment in self-awareness important to organizations, kind of on a broad level?
Self-awareness is essentially the starting zone or the foundation, in my opinion, and it's laid out by Marty in his book, to have access to identify blind spots so that you can identify how your behaviors might be showing up too much in a certain space and be able to tweak those behaviors to your advantage. Specifically, the investment of self-awareness for SSA is being focused on self-awareness coaching for our leaders. We know within SSA and outside organizations that leaders are the drivers of your culture. So if we can focus on the investment of coaching with our leaders, and we can give them the tools to be able to access what their, I'll use the language of Marty, but their gifts and gaps are, they can move within their roles and model the behavior of self-awareness for others, which will positively influence our culture and the people around them.
With that, Kassey, now let's just talk about you as an individual. You have done a lot of this work, coaching over the years, but in particular, you've recently taken the blind spotting assessment. And we want to hear from you. What new insights have you gained about yourself, you bringing the self-awareness model forward through your own results?
So I'll talk through when I first took the assessment itself. What surprised me most was having a confidence blind spot show up. In my self-awareness journey, self-confidence specifically has been something that I have been actively working on within myself. And when I received the blind spotting awareness, the initial assessment back, what resonated with me was that I am very confident in my subject matter expertise. I have worked with SSA for 17 years, 10 plus of which has been in the people and the human resources space. And what I have a blind spot towards is maybe where I need to lean into curiosity, so that leaning into being too confident in my area of expertise, I'm being challenged to remind myself to be curious when I'm hearing an outside opinion from operators, from leaders, from external advisors. So that was one key thing. The other clear kind of coaching direction that I'm working on right now is in an identity shift. I am the head of people for SSA, and it is something that I'm framing. I'm working on how I identify within that new role, because historically speaking, I would go into a space and introduce myself as, yes, I lead the people department, but I would use the term ninja. I like to be a ninja. I'm always present. I'm ever present within our leaders. I'm working in the background, supporting the structure, supporting all of our leaders so that we can um, influence performance for the company. And what has been clear through this blind spotting coaching is that I need to reframe my identity to match the role that I am in and the role that I am building towards, which is a chief people officer within SSA. And so I'm in that process right now. I'll keep you all posted on that shift. I'm sure Marty has some insights as
I
well.
see him leaning in.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, because the identity stuff is subtle, but it's so powerful, and it and in my experience, the problem kind of appears at some critical moment when you, in your terminology probably, you're thinking of yourself as a ninja, when that moment is calling for something different, is calling for that CPO type of identity. And so you miss the moment. And it might be a small thing, or it may have been a real critical decision point, and only at that moment does that subtle difference really kind of show up. So I'm curious to, as you're beginning to play with, I'm assuming you're going to retire the ninja, or at least knock it down from number one to three, four, or five in terms of how you describe yourself. Have you come up with some other term, other I am fill in the blank, and it's a different terminology than ninja?
It's a great question. I think I'm still formulating it. Um, but what comes to mind is I keep leveraging, kind of going back to thought leader, um, being the thought leader, being the expert in uh, human resources and organizational development needs for SSA. I'm at the phase, Marty, right now where just I'm choosing traits that I see portrayed for mentors, and those traits specifically are being a strong, assertive voice in the room, being known and seen as the thought leader or the expert in the people space, whether that be internally through sessions that are given, or externally giving speaking engagements or leaning into um, paper publications. And they hold their ground when is necessary to have a positive impact on the people of the organization. So
So, so I'm hijacking your moderator, Jill, if that's okay.
That is absolutely fine. There's others
Um,
in Kassey's role that are very much going through this, so this is great.
so the point about identity is related to role, is central. So if you think of the org chart, every box on that org chart in my opinion, exists for a reason, that only that box, there's certain things that only that box can do. And that's what you want to be really clear about. What can only you do in that role? And then you start to think about, how does that fit with my identity? So thought leader, I would certainly, that's part of that role, right? I mean, you are at the pinnacle of all the information and knowledge base about people. You're not the only thought leader, hopefully, in HR. Hopefully, there are other HR leaders in the organization, or even just other people, other leaders and other managers that have really thought leadership ideas about people. So I think the further refinement for you is maybe how to expand or further define what thought leadership means in your particular box on the org chart. And so, I mean, thought leader, you've got two words there, thought, which is conveying that sense of knowledge about people and HR, policies, procedures, experience, science, all that's involved there. And then you got that word leader. And so what does that really mean? What does the leader of HR, only you can do as the leader of HR, which maybe is different than a knowledge base, because the knowledge base is still relying on your ninja, your confidence, subject matter expertise. There's something that, I mean, you're at a level in the company as an EVP, no matter, there's an EVP of supply chain, or I don't know, whatever the other EVPs are in SSA Group, and all of you share something in common at that level in leadership, irrespective of your subject matter expertise. So that's where I challenge you to think about what is the leadership part of your job that may be different than the subject matter expertise.
I want to jump in there, Marty, and build upon this concept of each block on an org chart having a certain number of tasks that only that block can do. That framework, that prioritization, how could that, let's explore with you how that might be applicable to an HR leader that is looking at their org chart and seeing redundancies, seeing confusion and role overlap. How might we take that task from the individual level to the organizational level?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of reasons why organizations get structured in certain ways. So there may be, overlap and redundancy may not always be a problem. So I want to kind of make that right off. I mean, sometimes you maybe need to do it just to kind of have control of number of reporting relationships and other kinds of things. But yeah, a lot of those of you that are familiar with 5 dysfunctions of a team, and I think the one thing that Lencioni misses is that I think structure needs to go before all the relationship stuff. And this is me as a psychologist talking. You can have all sorts of turf battles and problems and interpersonal conflict because the boundaries aren't clear. And it isn't really an issue of trust or other kind of relationship issues. It's an organizational structure problem. So being really clear about what the authority is of that particular box on the chart, kind of as it's divided from the other boxes on the chart, is really critical. When I work with CEOs, I ask this question: what can only the CEO do? And I have 5 areas that I answer, and I think that's true for every box. Probably those 5 are similar, throughout the org chart. But really, what can only that job do is the central question.
For those of you who have your books handy, that is page 185, is what Marty is referencing of those 5 aspects that only a CEO could do. Marty, I'm going to lean into a flow kind of off script here with you and just thinking to a lot of times HR leaders are the ones that are at the pivot point of the conflict that comes from that lack of prioritization all the way up to the CEO. So where the CEO isn't doing those 5 things, what might a leader in Kassey's role or head of a CHRO or a CPO do when they realize their CEO is navigating some challenges with their prioritization?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question on a number of levels, Jill. I mean, the chief people officer, I mean, in my opinion, no matter what the company is, the critical resources are people and capital. With people and capital, you can buy everything else or solve everything else, but without the right people and the right capital, that's the blood flow of organizations. So the chief people officer, in my opinion, should be the CEO whisperer and the senior team whisperer, and there should be that mutual respect and trust at that very senior level within an organization of, I want a chief people officer that is able to tell truth to power. There are really only, in my view, 3 roles that can say no to the CEO. You can't do that. The CFO, the general counsel, chief legal officer, and the chief people officer. Those are the 3 that should be there to say and put some constraints or suggest constraints to the CEO. So you want to develop that relationship, and that's a 2-way street. So if the CEO isn't open to that, the chief people officer has a struggle. But then the next step is really at that senior team level, and I think all chief people officers, EVPs, whatever their title is, really want to have that relationship with the senior team, the team that reports directly to the CEO. So they turn to the HR leader as somebody to give them the advice that they really need, to give them some self-awareness that they don't have. And that's one job that's one job in that box. Kassey, back to kind of you develop a relationship with those senior team leaders, so you are the person they turn to when they have these difficult HR, people issues, personal issues, whatever it is. You're the person that they want the advice from, and they see you from that thought leadership, but they also see you from that interpersonal skill set leadership.
Kassey, thoughts, questions back for Marty?
I'm curious, Marty, how can, so as to go back to, so you were talking about the steps in terms of how you can build an organizational structure based on that box, right? And prioritization, or what can only that role do? How do you, so for HR leaders on this call that also drive some of that org dev crossover and building org structure, how could we put that into an exercise with our executive teams to make sure that we are doing that exercise for the roles themselves, but then beyond that, maybe because we have org structure already in place, how do we apply that to a person and kind of extend that to the gifts and gaps model of building a team that is complementary of one another as well?
I mean, you just outlined kind of the whole plan. Yeah, I mean, it has all those kind of multiple steps as you just kind of stated it. One place to start is you have to create a frame that's meaningful for maybe it's for the CEO or for the senior team to say, okay, this is a project we should get involved in. And so one frame that I think about with this is time management. That's what we're talking about. I mean, time is the one finite resource. Only certain hours in the day, only a certain amount of time you're going to be doing work. And the company that wins in the end is the company in many ways that was the most efficient with their time. That their time worked, this is prioritization, they worked on the important problems and solved the important problems. And I was really aware of this when I was a CEO. I had unlimited degrees of freedom of where I spent my time. I mean, other than showing up for a board meeting, I mean, I could say, no, I'm not going to that meeting, or I'm not going to visit with that person, or I'm going to meet with this person, or I'm going to get involved in this project. So being really clear about prioritization, what can only that box do in the chart? And I mean, you do more things than just those core things, but you've got to cover those core things. Then it starts to be the organizing principle for your time and to make people efficient instead of going where your instinct is taking you. This is back to your strengths, the gifts and gaps. I mean, you're going to go towards the things you feel like you can solve. Oh, I'm good at that. I'm going to take that. I was at doing a presentation to a publicly traded a technology company, and the chief technology officer, I love this. She said, I delegate things I don't know how to do, which is different than the control model of I delegate things I'm going to inspect, because I know it so well, I can delegate it and then inspect it. And how smart is to delegate things you don't know about and have a team that you trust to can solve those problems? That's pretty darn efficient. If you're the inspector all the time, that's inefficient. So you need to inspect and you need to do that as well. But, that maybe is 5% instead of 30% of your time. So anyway, thinking about to the organization, we need to be efficient. So let's strip back, let's sit down with each of these core boxes, your own box. What's the things you have to do that only you do? If you don't do them, nobody else is doing them or the wrong person is doing them. What are the decisions that only live in your box? What are the people that you need to have relationships with that only need to talk to you? What are the priorities from the company and the strategy for the company that you have some direct lever to control in some way? What do you do about culture that in your role you really can have an impact on culture? So thinking about those kinds of things then it starts to say, do I really need to be doing some of these other things? You look at your calendar and you say, do I really need to attend this meeting? Am I making do I need to attend that meeting because they need a decision from me? Or maybe they just need to talk about it for a while and come talk to me for 10 minutes. Have me come in at the last 10 minutes of the meeting and then, give a decision. So being really thoughtful about time management might be the organizing principle to kind of get into this.
To build on that, awareness is at the root of still kind of having the ability to figure out what you're prioritizing and not prioritizing. There's a question for both you, Kassey, and Marty. Kassey, kind of from the fundamental practical side of when performance has become an issue, how you're evaluating whether it's an awareness, so they have the ability to link intent to impact, or it's actually a skill gap, a competency dynamic. So I'm going to put it to Kassey first, and then Marty, let you expand on kind of some of the theoretical thinking around that.
Jill, just so I understand, the question is focusing on how to essentially tell or evaluate when something is a performance issue versus
a performance issue that's driven by lack of awareness, or a performance issue that's driven by actually a competency problem.
So when I think from the tactical sense, first, when you're looking at something that is performance versus a skills gap, is addressing, does the individual, can they articulate the problem at hand, or do they have a full logical knowledge of what is being asked of them? If it is something that uh, they clearly, they don't know how to execute on a specific spreadsheet, that's a skills gap. That's training that's necessary. But if it is an individual who has the awareness of knows the skill, has the skill set, but may not know or recognize when their behavior is showing up too much in a space, that's when it's a performance issue or performance-based issue that can be coached. Example, I think specifically in any business, can show up in a leader that is high in exhibition. They are talking, and it serves them well. Their gift of conversation and connectivity and networking serves them well in certain capacities. But when they are coaching a team, if they are the one person speaking, then it creates conflict in terms of their team says that they are not listening or that they're not actively engaging the team members. So it's a performance issue based on, we need to redirect this individual to ask more questions, get more curious with their people.
Marty, you want to elaborate a little bit on that? You speak a lot in the book about intent versus impact and how that links to blind spot areas.
Yeah, I think about this question kind of in terms of three things. You can almost imagine these three as a Venn diagram with the overlapping in terms of a particular performance issue. So it's knowledge acquisition. As Kassey was saying, I mean, do they have the knowledge? Do they, have they understand what this is all about, a particular issue? And then second is skill development. Think about sports. You can know the rules in the game of soccer and your position and everything else, but you just got to practice it a whole lot to get better and better. So there can be a skill deficit even if there is sufficient knowledge. And then the third is this whole area of blind spotting, your personal psychology. No matter how much knowledge, no matter what knowledge you have, no matter what skills you have, they still get expressed through who you are as a person. So do you know, using Kassey's example, do you know when to use your strength of conversation, and that's, inspiring and motivating your team, and it's clarity of goals and all sorts of things. Versus do you know when to dial back your over reliance on your conversational skill set because you're so good there? Do you know when you should be asking questions? Do you know when you should be you've lost the group and you're reading the room and they're pulling out their cell phones. Now it's time for them to talk rather than you to continue to talk. So that's the personal psychology part, being aware of when you're overplaying your strengths. So getting, good performance management is, happening in real time all the time. And in this piece of kind of self-awareness, it's getting the person curious about themselves. I mean, Kassey began with that in the very beginning about I'm curious. And that is where all this starts. And I think curiosity is probably like most characteristics in personality and psychology, it's on a bell curve. Some of us are at the tail end of super high curiosity, and that can be a problem. You can be, in your head all the time versus acting on it. And some people are at the other end, and they just don't ask those kind of why questions and kind of, I wonder why I did that. So kind of teaching a process of curiosity, a habit of curiosity, is helping people begin this process of self-improvement.
think to extend upon that, it's that process of curiosity can is I like the identification of the bell curve because it is something that if you're taking on a new role, if you're not leaning into that curiosity and leaning into kind of self-awareness, you might be utilizing tools that helped you or behaviors that helped you in a previous role and losing sight of what skills or what behaviors you need to build upon for that new role. And I share that because we have in SSA, we promote 1 and 2 of our salary positions is internally promoted. And so we navigate that role shift often, where the tools that helped get the individual contributor to success are no longer serving them in that leadership role. And those that are curious about their self-awareness have a much better chance at succeeding in that leadership role when they lean into that.
Yes. Marty, I know you and I and the BE team have talked a lot about the application of blind spotting and onboarding, while Kassey's talking in particular about that internal promotion. Why don't you elaborate, excuse me, on your thoughts of blind spotting in the onboarding process?
Sure. So, certainly HR leaders think all the time about skill development in a promotion and the onboarding. What are the new skills, knowledge that somebody needs in a new role when they're being promoted? This is really key in that very first leadership management role, moving from a subject matter expert to a manager. But it occurs at every level as you move up. So there is skill development, there's learning that needs to happen. There's relationship building, all sorts of other kinds of things that, you pick up a book on the first 100 days and they talk about a lot of that. But in addition, I like to think about it around what we've been talking about in terms of identity. It's an identity shift. And it's a piece of what, Kassey, you were talking about as well. I mean, being the subject matter expert in HR is not a leader. That's just being the subject matter expert. That's knowing a whole lot. And you've got people on your team when you want to have somebody, talk about salary and making sure that the salaries are fitting what the market demands and what health insurance looks like. I mean, there are subject matter experts on all those things. And you want to have that on a team. But when you become a leader, that's different. Now you're that first leadership role. After you've been in a while, you turn and you say, oh, darn it, I was this, the top engineer on my team, and now Joe knows more than me about, AI or something else because I've been spending my time on management. And that sense of your identity switch and feeling like if you like that previous role, there should be some sense of loss. And you should be giving up some of that subject matter expertise in favor of the new identity of being a manager. And so there's a psychological process in addition to a skill development process or a learning process. And I think all HR leaders should be attentive to this because not every promotion works. Some people get promoted and, guess what? They were happier. Their identity really is as a subject matter expert. It isn't. They're bored with management tasks and they're not curious enough about those to learn about them at the level of expertise that they need. They'd rather go back to their subject matter expertise. And so being attentive to that identity shift that happens. And it also begins before helping the person think about that next role and what's the identity shift that I'm going to need to make to be in that role, and think about almost put those clothes on in advance of actually being in the role, so you can kind of get a sense of do they fit or not, and where they feel nice and where do they feel tight, and I need to figure that out. And if the HR leaders are along for that journey of that transition process, they can help support, coach, and in those situations when it doesn't work, not make it a career failure and a huge problem for that person. It just was wrong role for you, and let's figure out what really does fit with what your identity is.
Kassey, kind of how do you see that supporting even some of the work you and the initiatives you have at SSA right now?
Well, I think Marty touched on there's multiple phases of the employee life cycle that this blind spotting awareness, the assessment, and the book can help in the onboarding. It helps in the onboarding process. I like that Marty is anchoring towards the identity shift. And even before that is if we look at SSA's 150% internal promotion rate, if we thread into our leadership development programs the blind spotting assessment tool, we can work with leaders that are identifying, saying that they want that next step ahead of getting that role promotion, to work on that identity shift ahead of time. I like so threading it into programs like leadership development and succession planning seems seamless. I think the other thought process with it supporting the onboarding process is in how a new hire from an external hire, so non-internal promotion, but an external hire can be welcomed into and set up for success within an organization. If you have a very tight culture, or you have a key role that you're hiring for and placing, we can be intentional about how an individual's identity and behavior and traits may be showing up, and coach them through that onboarding process so that they are seamlessly working and cooperating within the new team that they're joining.
Kassey, that's beautiful. I love that you brought up culture with identity with an external hire. I think that's the real difficult match to make sure that the puzzle pieces are fitting well together. You might hire an external person who really is ready for whatever leadership or management role, and so it's not a identity problem at that level, but the culture fit identity is huge, and SSA has a very clear, distinct culture. You can't be a wallflower and not participate. You can't not come to the the holiday party or whatever kinds of things. You're talking
St.
and you're
Patrick's
interacting.
party.
Yeah, and so being able to think about all of that and assess that, and for you guys to be so clear, here's what culture is. A hard thing. It's like, with your own family, every family has a culture and you live it. So it's hard for you to almost be outside it and kind of describe what it is, because it's just part of who you are. But the more clear you can be about here's what our culture is. And that's really kind of like the behaviors. I think culture always comes down to here's how things get done here.
Mm-hmm.
Relationships are super important. Don't, in your first 100 days, here's the 20 people you better have a strong relationship with, or you're not going to get stuff done around here. And let's, think about what's your plan about how you develop relationships with each of these key people, and all the other aspects of culture fit. And that is a in addition to kind of getting promoted to a role and finding out that that doesn't fit you, we've all been in companies where the culture doesn't fit us, and realizing that, it's not our failure. It's not the company's failure. It's just the fact that that's not a culture fit for us. The mission of the company, the values of the company, how things get done, the relationships don't fit who we are. So yeah, being really clear about that with external hires is paramount.
Kassey, as we look to almost the top of the hour here, SSA, from the CEO level through the executive leadership team and permeating beyond into many of the managers and kind of the in-unit managers, has leaned into a culture of awareness. Talk about just kind of some of the benefits of more and more people throughout the SSA kind of teamhood, I'll call it, understanding their blind spots and how that language and opportunity to have better conversations, connections, what is it looking like at SSA?
Well, I'll start first with our executive team, specifically with our CEO, Sean McNicholas, and our COO, Travis Kite. What has changed with the blind spotting coaching is the extended conversations that are occurring, that are being modeled and led by Sean and Travis and other executives in this
What do you mean
space.
by extended conversations?
Extended conversations in terms of Sean is transparent around the awareness coaching, like his blind spots and the coaching that he is going through. And it has given permission for us to have conversations about if I see a blind spot, maybe in action. So the extended conversation of more specifically being very transparent about, we all lean into self-awareness coaching. It is a part of our culture. We as leaders want each of our teams to lean into this in turn.
Thank you. Marty, as we wrap up our time today, when you see HR leaders and their teams leaning into it, what do you see as the impact of blind spotting organizationally and on their businesses?
Yeah, I think and Kassey just talked about it. I think it's a way it's a easy entry point for real-time feedback. And, I think the strength weakness kind of mindset and models that have been around bring with it some sense of weakness brings with it some sense of failure, and in a competitive business environment, you don't want to show any vulnerability that's going to allow somebody to, get an edge on you in some particular way, or people to doubt your competence. But thinking about it as errors in the system, this is just who we are, and in fact, it's often our strengths that, 5 or 10% of the time are getting in our way. It provides, I think, an easier opportunity for people to say, no big deal, and help point it out. And we use the sports analogy a lot, that the higher you go as an elite athlete, the more coaching you get. Everything you do is videotaped and analyzed and taken apart, and it's all open, it's all out there for everybody to see. And if you have a spirit of, I just want to get better so we all can get better, it makes it much easier to have those extended conversations, or to point out somebody's blind spot, or help them, help be an accountability partner to help them change. So it seems to kind of take away the stigma and the machismo and the alpha aspects of all these things that can get in the way of just good, honest feedback.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I'm going to wrap up here and invite any of our attendees to put some questions in the chat or come off mute and ask Kassey or Marty a question about blind spotting in business, blind spotting in HR. questions, comments? If you're with us, tell us something you learned. All right, we'll give it one more minute. Going once, going twice.
Yeah, I'll give you a comment
Okay,
then.
thank you, Chris. Jump on in, sir.
I want to go all the way back to the beginning. I love the comments that I heard about the focus on identity and what it means to be a thought leader versus a leader. And there's so many interesting things that you could talk about with that. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Chris.
Yeah, what we say reveals a lot about ourselves. And you can just kind of not get too fancy and not get too complicated. I mean, just those two words, as you said, there's a lot that can be developed, a whole bunch of questions and an inquiry that can reveal a lot of self-awareness by, just picking up those two words.
Well, thank you all for joining, and we so appreciate it. We will share this recording along with some notes from today coming on up. Kassey, Marty, any closing thoughts? Just thank you both so much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you guys so
Bye.
much. Bye.
Thank you.